some years ago, a white woman, the librarian, came up to me crying profusely, and I started crying too. When I first started at Penn, 33 years ago, before coming to Penn, I was a clinical psychologist running residential treatment centers for sexually abused and physically abused young people and their families. And while I loved the clinical work and family therapy, I spent quite a few years at the Philadelphia Child Guidance Clinic. I was also interested in research. I couldn't decide between being a therapist and a researcher. And so I was interested in science. And the question that I was really wanting to get to was how do families protect their children from racial hostility? And that question bothered me, but it also was intriguing for me. And I tried to write while I was working 60-hour jobs as a residential treatment center clinical director. But after that, I got a chance, when I got a chance to come to Penn, a lot of that changed. And at least I had dreams that finally I'd get a chance to write without interruption and with time. I'd have colleagues to write. I'd have colleagues that could go to the coffee houses around Penn where we could help each other out, because you need support when you're trying to write at a place like Penn. So I had dreams. I had dreams that I'd have collegial support. I had dreams that I would read my colleagues' work, they would read mine. And I also realized that being the only African-American and the first psychologist in the department, that it might be a little scary for some of my colleagues, not only my very presence as a Black person, but also the topic that I wanted to study for my career. And so I made a pact to become, or try to become, the kindest and gentlest colleague in the history of colleagues, with the hope that maybe by the end of the first year, I would win the Professor of Congeniality Award. And I didn't know if there was such a thing, but that's what I was going to win, because my theory was that if I could shapeshift myself ever so slightly to be that kind and gentle colleague, my colleagues would come out of their offices and we could go to the coffee houses. I would read their work. We could look into each other's eyes. We could hold hands and skip into the sunset of academic nirvana. Unfortunately, it didn't happen that way. I read their work. They didn't necessarily read mine. And as much as I tried to be non-threatening, it didn't work out the way I expected. And so after my first year, I was somewhat disillusioned, and I questioned whether I should continue at the University of Pennsylvania. And I picked up a Philadelphia Inquirer magazine, the insert, and I came across an article, because when you're disillusioned about your future, it's often magazines that you pick up and you thumb through. And I thumbed through these images, and these images seemed eerily familiar to me. And I decided to read on the article around these images called Another Country. The first paragraph of that article goes like this: "It's out there somewhere between the corporate capital of Wilmington and the neon brightness of Delaware's recreational shore. Out there somewhere, after the byways scatter and the pavement goes to dirt, is a place deep within poverty and at the edge of hope." Well, I was intrigued. First of all, because I'm from Delaware, actually Southern Delaware, in between, in the woods, basically, between Milton and Georgetown. So I wanted to know, where is this place that they are calling another country? Where is this place at? I wanted to know. I was intrigued. And then I got pissed. I got a little upset because I couldn't understand how the newspaper could misspell Delaware, the state that I grew up in. I mean, this Pulitzer Prize winning newspaper somehow misspelled my state. It bothered me, but I didn't let it disrupt me. I kept moving on, and I came across an image of Billy Johnson. After a day picking potatoes, Billy Johnson takes a rest in the migrant workers camp where he lives. And in that phrase, migrant workers camp, I triggered on an image in my head, a memory of a migrant workers camp that we used to pass by in a town called Slaughter Neck, in between Milton and Milford. We had to pass by a migrant workers camp in Slaughter Neck on our way up to Milford or to Dover, Delaware. And I can still see in my mind's eye that community, that gated, fenced-in community and rusted tin-roofed houses that we used to pass by. I also triggered on another image of Jose Santiago, because in first and second grade, Jose and I were best friends. And primarily we were best friends because we were called very rude names about our ethnicity. And that would mean sometimes that we'd end up fighting some of the white boys at recess or lunchtime. And I can tell you one thing about Jose. Jose was the biggest and the largest person in first and second grade. I really didn't know how old Jose was. I didn't really care how old Jose was, because whenever Jose was around, we kicked butt. We never lost a fight. But sometimes Jose would not be there, and I'd have to fight for myself, or my mother would push my 4-year-old little brother over the Milton Elementary School wall, and he would try to help, but it wasn't the same because we were small and Jose was big, and when Jose wasn't around, we got our butt kicked. Now, my parents told me that Jose was a member of a migrant workers family who had to sometimes go down south to pick crops. I moved on and I came across another image of Lakeisha Burton. And before I could finish this caption, the word Burton triggered a host of thoughts and feelings and memories, because in Southern Delaware, Burton is a common clan name. You will find folks who call themselves Black or Brown with lots of family named Burton, and you will find white folks who also name Burton in Southern Delaware. And part of that also belied a socioeconomic divide. In fact, even now, if you go down to Southern Delaware and you drive across the neighborhoods, you will find strewn over many lawns properties after Burton Realty. In many respects, Burton was a common name. And when I came back to this image and I read the rest of the caption, I realized that Lakeisha and Cassandra lived near Milton, Delaware, and then it hit me. All of a sudden, it hit me that they were talking about my neighborhood. Now, I was pissed. I was upset. I was disappointed. I was hurt, because we would never think of our people, our community, the folks that helped to raise us, as living another country and living on the edge of hope. That's not the way we would describe ourselves. Those folks helped to raise us, to keep us safe. And when I came back to Penn, I had a very different resolve. In my second year, I said to myself, I belong here at the University of Pennsylvania, but I do not fit in. And I define belonging through the question, do I accept myself? Do I accept my people, my culture, my style, my attitude, my competence? And the answer was yes. I can do clinical psychology at the University of Pennsylvania. And even if I have to write by myself, I can do that. Whereas I define fitting in through the question of, do I want to depend on others' definition of my people, or acceptance of my culture, my style, my difference, my competence? And the answer was no, especially if shape-shifting is the primary coping strategy to try to navigate that drama of fitting in. One, for me, it didn't work. Shape-shifting, no matter how much I tried to be the kind of general, it didn't necessarily work. And two, it's kind of grandiose of me to think that I could somehow change the fear of race or difference in other people simply by how I acted. Kind of grandiose. Now, some of you may have heard of code switching. It's a common term that people use when you're in a place of difference, and it comes out of the field of linguistics, where people change their language in order to fit in and not stand out because of the anxiety of being different. I like shape-shifting better than code switching. It comes out of the show Star Trek Next Generation. I don't know if you've heard of that, but the very first Star Trek, there was a race of folks called shapeshifters who literally could become somebody else. And I like that better than code switching, because when we think about what happens in an emotional, in a relationship space, when people do not feel comfortable in their own skin, in their own bodies, and they try to fit in, they change more than their language. They change their attitude about who they are. They change their identity. They change their physicality, their walk, their talk. And all of that together is more more appropriate to what we understand in the research as to how people change who they are just so that they don't threaten other people or that they don't fit in. I also came across a wonderful African proverb that I use today. And it goes, the lion's story will never be known as long as the hunter is the one to tell it. And what I mean by that, and what my colleagues at the Lion's Story, who do a lot of training around racial literacy in this country, you can go to the website, thelionstory.org, and find not only how we train, but who. What we mean by that is everybody has a racial story, and everybody's racial story is powerful and important. And my racial story is not better than your racial story, and your racial story is not better than mine. But there is a caveat. And the caveat is that if I don't know my racial story, then I can't develop it. I can't grow from it. I can't exhume the power that comes from the tragedy and the shame and the challenge of that racial story, as well as the triumphant aspects. And that is part of our work, the idea that we all have a story, but if we want to use it to its benefit to navigate the politics of difference in our society today, we have to take a journey in that narrative. So in our work, we encourage people to tell their racial stories. And in the field of study, the question I'm interested in and have been is called racial socialization. That is, how do families protect their children from racial hostility? But we could broaden it beyond race to other kinds of rejections that society, relationships, institutions like schools, justice, health might give to young people and their families. And so we call that racial socialization as a science, but it's actually what a lot of people call the talk. And when we train people, we try to ask them to bring photographs about the people, often family, not just family, but television, social media are also socializers around how to navigate or not navigate racial matters. This is my family, and we ask people to bring pictures when we do the training. As you can see, for some reason in my childhood in Southern Delaware, having photographs of big heads happened to be a big deal for some reason, a genre perhaps in Southern Delaware only. I don't know why the heads are so large, but this is my family. As you can see, my parents are the only ones smiling in this picture. My brother and sister and I are navigating danger. We're worried about something happening. I am the oldest of three. My brother Brian and my sister Christy are younger. And we grew up in a multicultural family. Both my parents are African American, but my father was born and raised in Southern Delaware, and my mother was born and raised in North Philadelphia. And there are no two places more different in the world than Southern Delaware and North Philadelphia. My parents often argued about everything. They couldn't get along on most anything because they had very different cultural upbringings. My father's way of navigating the politics of race when he was trying to teach us what to do was spiritual. He believed if anybody bothered us because of the culture, because of the color of our skin or who we were, that we were not supposed to get physical. But it was a spiritual warfare, and that we should pray for them, believing that God would get them back in the end. My father believed in retaliation. It was just a spiritual retaliation where we were not supposed to sully ourselves with physicality. In fact, he believed it. He said, you pray for him. He fought for that in the house because God will one day, in that great getting up morning, take care of you. He believed in that, and he had to fight for that in our house. My mother, on the other hand, growing up in North Philly, had a very different upbringing. She was used to walking to school, to and from school, through racially segregated neighborhoods on her way to Gratz High School. And in that process, she had to fight. And her policy, and I as the oldest had to protect my brother and sister from all enemies, foreign and domestic. Her instructions to me, not only could I fight physically, but I could pick up inanimate objects to help me in the cause. She was just as vociferous in her arguments in the house about her position. And you can imagine what it's like to be in a home with these strong-willed, very strong-willed people navigating the space. My mother, I could say, did not fit in to Southern Delaware. She came to Southern Delaware, she might have thought it was like another place, another country, because she didn't get along with the Black or brown people because they thought she was too cityfied and too haughty because she was different. She didn't get along with the white people because she had a certain way about her. My mother was incredibly upset when she would perceive in the Southern Delawarean thoroughfares to the post office or the store to see Black and brown people being physically deferential in the presence of whites. They wouldn't look them in the eye. They would let them walk by without even talking. My mother thought that was outrageous. She was not deferential. When we went to go somewhere, my mother walked with a certain stride and attitude, and the three of us had to stay behind her because when we go into the stores, it is a war zone and we could not be late. And if people stared at us, my mother would stare back at them. And we, the three of us, would stare back at them as well. That's how it was when we went to the store. In particular, the Acme supermarket in Georgetown, Delaware. Now, before we would go into the store, and my mother was a reader, a lover of books. She read voluminously, and she exposed us to Emmett Till, to the racism of the South and the country, around the politics of difference and how to speak your voice. But when we were in the supermarket at Acme, she was stressed, and she would give us a version of the talk. She would start in the back of the car. Sometimes it would go like this. She would start and say to us, when we get into this store, I don't want you to ask for nothing or touch nothing. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? We said nothing because we knew she wasn't finished. Sometimes she would stop and stare at us. Sometimes she would get out of the car, look up into the skies as to call on God, get back in the car and have the conversation, start the conversation as if she had never left. I don't really care how many other children are in that store. They're not my children. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? And then we said, yes, Mom. Now, the funny thing is our mother would give us that talk over and over and over and over and over again. And the irony of it is that we never acted up in public. We were too scared to act up in public because our father had us in church 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I was always afraid my first romantic experience, my whole church would show up right in the middle of it. As soon as I'm making my move, the choir would come out of one corner and start singing "Oh Happy Day." And the praying lady, Mrs. Warrington, would come out of another corner and start praying the house down. The embarrassment, the shame of it was too embarrassing. There was no way I was going to act up, and neither did my brother and sister. So why would this mother, this woman, Alice Stevenson, give us the talk about not acting up in public? Well, she gave it to us, and this is the first lesson around racial socialization. She was angry and she was stressed, not about us, but about them and how they perceived us. The first skill that you have to learn in this world of racial socialization is that it's not so much that you focus on you, but how other people might misperceive you. And that is a skill that we talk about later. So we go into the supermarket. Some days nothing happens, but on other days it's so anxiety producing, it's so tense that you walk in, you could cut the thickness with the knife. It's how intense, because of the way people are looking and staring and rolling their eyes and sucking their teeth, and that would stress the children out, stress us out. We would try to distract our mother by counting up all the food in the shopping cart. So she would focus on our math skills and be proud of her children and not see the looks or the teeth sucking. Some days that worked, but some days nothing worked, and there was nothing we were going to do. There was nothing that we were going to do to stop the impending conflict, which usually happened at the conveyor belt. For some reason, the person behind the counter, upset by my mother's attitude and walk and style and stare, and felt like they had to do something or say something to put my mother in her place. And the worst thing they could do is, when we get to the conveyor belt, to throw our food into the bag after we paid for it. And when that happened, it was on. My mother would start telling the person who they were, who their family was, where to go, how fast to get there. I don't know if you've ever been cursed out, by a woman from North Philadelphia, but you haven't lived. If you haven't, my mother was awesome. She was incisive. She was clinical. And as awesome as she was, as in all as I was, we were also scared to death. Now, we tried to warn the person behind the counter. You probably don't want to mess with my mother, but sometimes it didn't matter. They had to go on and do what they did, and my mother would do what she does. Person would be on the floor, writhing in utter decay and then devastation. She was that good. Now, I tell that story because in my household and growing up, the messages that we got strongly were two. One, sometimes when it comes to racial conflicts in the world, you got to pray or ponder or think through or process, prepare. But two, sometimes you got to say something. You got to do something. You got to speak up. You got to believe in something and not let people push you around. And those two skill sets, I would argue, is what we think of as racial literacy, the ability to prepare and the ability to speak up. Those are very important in the skill sets. Now, both my parents were Christians. The difference is my father prayed before a racial conflict and my mother prayed after the person was on the ground. She was that good. Now, why is that important? As my story, for me, in navigating the politics of race in Penn, I needed something to calm me down when I was the only one. And one of the things that helped calm me down was my own story. If I could hearken back to those experiences, it was very important. Now, my brother is a very famous lawyer. My sister is a wonderful musician. My brother started the Equal Justice Initiative down at Montgomery, Alabama. There was a Peace and Justice Museum that he also founded that has the best examples. This is our family at EJI. These are some of the examples of the museum. If you go there, you'll find the latest research in the country on lynching in the world. We know a lot more now than we did even 10 years ago. But a lot of people, because my brother is so famous, he has an Emmy award-winning HBO special, people don't think he's my brother, right? And they think I photoshopped myself into these pictures. This is us in front of the Supreme Court, where he argued on behalf of Johnny D. McMillan. In his book, Just Mercy, he talked about one of his clients, one of his first clients, who was falsely accused and placed on death row. And in many respects, for 6.5 years, accused of killing a 16-year-old girl from a dry cleaning store in Monroeville, Alabama, which, by the way, is the home place of To Kill a Mockingbird. There's a To Kill a Mockingbird festival there every year. So I tell people he is my brother, they don't believe me. So since they think I Photoshop, I show pictures of us as children. This is us. We slept in the same bed till I was 14, until my father built onto our house in Southern Delaware. Now, when I'm talking about this, the rationale behind this is my two children. I have one son who's 32 and the youngest is 18. And we're not going to talk about how that happened. My oldest went to Masterman. Sorry about that. I know they're a little bit of a rivalry to you all, but they are the reason why I do this work. Now, when I'm speaking to third graders, I give the very same talk. They literally wake up when I show a picture of Michael B. Jordan, and they will stay awake for the rest of the conversation. Why am I talking about this? Everybody has a racial story. My racial story is not better than yours, and yours is not better than mine, but if we don't excavate our own narrative, somebody else will write a narrative for us. Unfortunately, not everybody wants to hear our story. And I love this poem by Nayera Waid. Some people, when they hear your story, contract, others upon hearing expand, and this is how you know. Now, I'm going to ask you all to use the chat. We'll do this quickly. We don't have a lot of time. But when this is part of understanding some of the research on what is it like to deal with racial stress and conflict. So this, when you see this image, if you could either use your microphone or write in the chat, what do you see when you see this image? Just yell out like you do or write it in the chat. And I don't know if Ms. Robinson could help me in the process. Maybe I can actually get it through the chat. So what do you see when you see this image? This keeps me from talking the entire time. A snake. It's a snake. Okay,
different viewpoints of the same thing.
thank you. Thank you very much for that. Thank you, Bridget. Thank you, Leslie. Different perspectives. An elephant, Robin, thank you. Walt, only seeing part of the full picture. That's right. Debbie, you got it. It's an elephant. A lot of people, elephant Nancy, thank you. All right. How many of you, just for the sake of argument, did not see that the folks have on blindfolds? Just for the sake of argument, how many of you did not see the blindfolds? All right. Part of the reason I actually, thank you, Debbie. Part of the reason I use this example is that sometimes one of the wonderful science bits of knowledge that we have around racial conflict or racial conversation or stress is that sometimes when we're in racial moments, we are so stressed to do or say the right thing that we will be so stressed that our brains go on lockdown. In fact, Claude Steele, a famous social psychologist, talks about this as a racing mind. You ever lose your keys and you go all the place looking for them? In fact, you start getting scared and panic. You go out to your car thinking maybe you left in your car, somebody could take your car, and then you come back in and your keys are right where you started. Well, that's an example of your brain is working overtime in panic. And on a scale of 1 to 10 of a stress scale, 8, 9, and 10 would be like threat level, panic. And when we panic, we see some things, brain goes on lockdown, racing mind. We see some things right in front of us and not see other things right in front of us. Imagine having a conversation about race or gender or sexuality with somebody, and you're so stressed that you're going to get it wrong or say the wrong thing that you hear some of what they are telling you and not all of what they're telling you. And you're expected to give some feedback. In many respects, that's what we think of a particularly racially stressful situation. Now, it could be that this image, as Denise is describing, is really a poor image, and it's not a way for you to see the blindfolds. It doesn't have to be racial stress, but there is a science around saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing. Another thing is, some people could see that Delaware was misspelled earlier, and some might not. It may be because of the graphics, but it could also be that our brains are on lockdown. And when our brains go on lockdown, we lose peripheral vision and hearing, which makes us not great decision makers. Now, if I asked you to look at this image again and tell me not just what you think, but what you feel, could you put in the chat, what feelings do you have about this image or what's happening in this image? Not what you think, but what you feel. Do you have a feeling about what you see in this image? Frustration, thank you, Megan. Leslie's frustrated as well. Could you tell us a little bit of why you're frustrated? Bridget, stressed, thank you. Carol feels frantic. I found it a little humorous. Can anybody tell me why you have these feelings? Curiosity, conflict. Everyone knows they're right.
I just found it a little humorous that it's clearly an elephant to me. I didn't see the blindfolds and like what blindfolds and why are they all saying all these other things? That's why I found it funny.
Okay, thank you, Debbie. Great. Interest, confusion. Okay. So the reason I asked you not just about what you think, but what you feel in this is because when we have racial discussions or discussions around diversity, we often spend more time thinking and less time feeling, more time in our heads and less time trying to figure out what is going on emotionally. And that is a tragic way to engage conversation. And part of our job is to help people through that. That's the work we're trying to get to. But for the rest of our little bit of time that we have, we're going to spend a lot more time on not just what you think, but what you feel. And part of our work is seeing equity through a both-and lens, not either or. There are ways in which sometimes we are both, sometimes we are brilliant and other times we're not all that brilliant. Sometimes we are normal, and other days, if we catch us in the wrong place of stress, we could easily diagnose. There's a way in which both and captures a little bit more. If we go back to this image, if you saw these folks as both blinded and sighted, would you feel differently about them? Some of us believe you would, because you think, wow, they see some things, but they don't see some other things. And that might change the way I might feel if I thought they were just not seeing. There's also another issue about stress, and this is very important in the politics of race or difference. How many of you would agree with me that the person who discovered a snake is going to be a lot more stressed than the person who discovered a rope? Would you agree with that? Let's assume, for the sake of argument, let's say, I don't know, 29 snakes were interested in racial literacy. They heard that Central High School was having a parent meeting and they were going to talk about racial literacy. They decided to show up because nobody tells snakes anything. They decided we're going to find out about racial literacy, and they decided to come to the houses where Debbie and all our other folks are and slither in between the windows. They see the screen, they're trying to get to the knowledge. They slither on top of, through the windows and on top of the carpet, on top of your desk to see what's happening on the computer. And they see an elephant and they say, oh my God, so there's an elephant. Some of our best friends are elephants. Imagine that, 29 snakes. Now, in the chat, could you say on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being highly stressed and 1 being not stressed at all, what score would you give if 29 snakes showed up in your particular abode, your office, your room, your home? What number would you give in that place? Some of you would give me 10. Nina's got me a 10. Carol, 11. Bridget's changing the entire, I mean, goodness. Jennifer's at a 7. We got anybody at a 3? Most people are at 10s. Usually when I'm hanging around schools, I get at least a biology teacher that has a snake in the room, in their office somewhere, or a pet snake. Crystal's at a 5. Okay. Well, part of this exercise is to give you one little clip of an example of a neuroscience experiment that was conducted by Sophia Trewalter out of University of Virginia, in which she found that images of showing people images in a very short period of time of Black faces, mostly male, triggered people at a significantly high level to spike in fear responses similar to the way they would spike if they were confronted with spiders or snakes. So the idea of a psychological experiment gets to us the understanding that in face-to-face encounters, sometimes we are so overwhelmed about racial moments that we might be frightened to be at 8, 9, and 10, and sometimes overreact to what's happening. And so some of the assumptions we make is that society teaches us how to dodge race and equity. There is a way in which we have learned how not to talk about difference, that equity particularly is not just about saying the right thing, it's about also challenging when difference is not being fairly treated. And it involves managing stress, because the more that we are afraid to say the wrong thing, the more we are likely to also not navigate the stressful moments. We think that relationship change is just as important as systems change, and we could talk about that, because legal remedies won't heal the emotional trauma that comes from these encounters, and that competence is more important than character. And finally, that we can change equity outcomes in proximal spaces. Now, what are racial encounters? They're incredibly stressful, but our work and others have found that encounters are so stressful that they overtax our ability to regulate our feelings, our body, and our thoughts. And if you only focus on feelings and not thoughts, or thoughts and not feelings, and then still not focus on your body reactions, you're going to miss out on how to manage a stressful encounter. The research on this is important, because if there were no outcomes negative from having racially stressed experiences that were unresolved, then we wouldn't be talking. But a lot of research about this, and we could talk about this in the Q&A, related to racial stress and trauma being harmful to the health of adults and children, and particularly academic work when it comes to trying to navigate school experiences with teachers and peers without having voice to speak to moments in which you feel demeaned. If I asked you all this question, which grade do you think students of all racial groups are expelled the most? What would you say in the chat? Just put your name in the chat. I mean, what grade do you think students of all racial groups are expelled the most? And because of time, I'm going to rush. When we ask people, mostly they say 7th and 8th grade. And I think it has nothing to do with the question. I think most people would answer this question, hated 7th and 8th grade. They hated themselves in 7th and 8th grade. And they hated people looking at their face in 7th and 8th grade. The answer is pre-K. And if you go to the website and look up pre-K left behind, you're going to get my good friend Walter Gilliam talking about expulsion rates in pre-K classrooms, 3 times that of K through 12 students. And the funny thing about this is that it's a racial problem, and it's not a child problem, according to Walter. It is a adult problem, which he calls, and he's at the Yale Child Study Center, run egregious overreactions. That's his view of it. When we look at the disproportionality of preschoolers being expelled, I think of it as racial stress and threat. Now, what do we do about it? That's the part of why we're here to talk about it, because we know if the stress of these encounters harm our bodies, our physical health, our emotional health, and our mental health, how do we heal? The theory that I've talked about, I won't bore you. It basically says, when we've looked at families that talk to their kids about race, when we look at school classrooms where they're open to having these conversations, and when others have looked at, children learn skills on how to navigate conflict around race. It's very important. The theory behind it is the more I'm exposed to information and strategies, the less scared I am. The less scared I am, the more confidently I begin to, instead of run from racial moments or diversity moments, I engage them with a sense of confidence. So racial socialization is talked about as building confidence. And when we think of how you do it, we think of these 4 elements: affirming humanity, protection of harm, from harm, redirecting self-destructive thinking, and connecting to thriving relationships. The research on this, I won't bore you, but even from preschool through adolescence to even parenting, we know that the benefits of talking about race are multiply important for not only academic well-being, but emotional well-being. So regulating your stress, building your confidence, and confronting hate all relate to positive health outcomes for adults and children. All right, let me move on. So racial literacy then, what is it? As much as we've done research on talking to kids about race and how families try to protect their children, and it doesn't matter around race, the more that families talk to their kids about navigating racial conflicts, regardless of race, they show up better on different indices. The problem was that when we were talking to so many families, the children would say, our parents sometimes are variable in what they say. Some parents are very direct, like my mother would be direct, here's what I want you to do if somebody calls, and others would be vague. Like my father sometimes would go like, look, if you lay down with dogs, you're gonna get up with fleas. And I'm supposed to figure out the civil rights message into that, Some parents just are not very direct. And so racial literacy is about, what if we upped our game and we started being more explicit to help young people navigate conflict? And not just young people, but adults. What do I do? What can I say with a certain amount of confidence? And these 3 skills is what we focus on. One, that racial literacy is the ability to read, recast, and resolve racially stressful encounters. So reading is the first skill. How do I notice that something is happening? Do I see the racial elephant in the room or not? Some people do, some people don't. Doesn't make them bad people, it just makes them less prepared. How do I see through color blindness? Sort of color blindness in the research is thought to be a way to keep power and not learn new things, to evade responsibility, when for the rest of the world, color matters, being different matters. So reading is around noticing and accurately interpreting what's going on, what I see. Do I see the elephant in the room? Recasting is sort of like regulating the stress. Let's say I'm at an 8, 9, and 10. How do I bring my 8, 9, and 10 facing a tsunami or a poisonous snake down to a 5, 6, or 7, right? Where it's less threatening. 8, 9, and 10 is impossible. 5, 6, or 7 is challenging, but workable, not impossible. All right, so breathing in hope, exhaling self-doubt. The strategy that we use, and we've been doing this with children as young as 3rd grade, with lots of success, where young people are able to calculate, locate, communicate, breathe and exhale. Calculate would be, what feelings am I having right now and how intense are they? Locate is, where in my body do I feel it, and be specific. Communicate is, what self-talk comes to my mind? What do I say during the incident? And what memories or images also come to my mind? So this is around being aware, noticing, and mindfulness is very key in this process. And breathing in 4 counts, holding it for 4 counts, and then exhaling for 4 counts is a strategy that helps to open up, bring oxygen to your brain. And when your brain is on lockdown at 8, 9, and 10, where you've lost peripheral hearing and sight, breathing in slowly opens that up, where you can see more, gather more information, make better judgments. Closed off, you're not a great decision maker. Calculate example, I'll give you one. Let's say someone called me a racial slur. His name is Joey. I've been working with Joey for 5 years at my workspace. And I found out that I realized I was angry at a 9 on a scale of 1 to 10 at Joey. And what happened? And I was sad at a 7. That's calculate. Locate is, where in my body do I feel it? I was angry at a 9, and I could feel that on the back of my neck, like my neck was on fire, very specific. In fact, it was the left side of my neck, not on my right. That's locate. The sadness I feel in my gut, like I got betrayal, feels like betrayal, like I got kicked in the gut. 7 is where I feel that anger, that sadness is in my gut. Locate. Communicate is, what do I say to myself? I say, I thought Joey and I was friends. We used to go to the Sixers games. I couldn't believe he said that to me. And memory is flashback. I can still remember Jose and I fighting at the Melton Elementary schoolyard. Or when I was at Eastern University and Roots came out. It was a very tense time on campus. All of these, breathing, exhaling, allow us to make better judgments and bring our 8, 9s, and 10s down to 5, 6, or 7. Finally, resolving racially stressful encounters, engaging and not avoiding racial moments. It's about not underreacting, where I pretend the racial or diversity or identity challenge or stress didn't bother me when it really did bother me. Or overreact, and that's when I curse at everybody, including the cat and the dog, and they had nothing to do with the situation. Resolving is not about solving racism or solving inequity. It's around managing the drama that's happening in my body, thoughts, and feelings. All right. If you look at the research on the power of confronting prejudice, and this is true for children, is that not only does it improve well-being, it also challenges offenders from using stereotypes in the future. We could come back to that. We've done a lot of work, not only in communities, but also other ways. Racial literacy is a part of the different projects that we have done out of the Racial Empowerment Collaborative. And even at Sesame Street, we've been giving feedback on Sesame Street. If you go to the Racial Justice Initiative, you'll see that even for little children, breathe, feel, and share is a wonderful way for children to start to notice what's happening to their bodies and to speak up against things that they don't like. Now, in our work, and maybe another conversation we can have for the future about how to practice these issues, we ask people in our work to begin by thinking of, what racial messages or interactions do you remember while growing up? So if I asked you right now, just for 1 minute, to think about what racial messages or interactions do you remember while growing up? What comes to mind? And what do you notice? Just give you a minute to think about it. Messages could be verbal or nonverbal. A lot of communication is not really verbal when we think about difference or race or gender or sexuality. Children pick up on nonverbals perhaps more, anthropologists would say. As you're thinking about it, I want you to notice, well, I'm sorry, I'm not giving you the whole minute. Okay, now if we were in a training session, I would ask you, did you notice anything about yourself, your body, your thoughts, or your feeling while you were coming up with that story as part of your story? And does anybody, even in this short period of time, want to put anything in the chat about what you notice about yourself? This is how we would help young people or adults practice, calculate, locate, communicate, breathe, and exhale. Thank you, Jennifer, for sharing that. We know it's not easy to do this in a place and on chat, but we've learned a lot. And Nina, you noticed that you were debating. Thank you. This is very important. All of these are part of your narrative, your story. I noticed that when I remember things, some of it feels fuzzy. I noticed that I was even scared to even start thinking about it. I noticed that I didn't have any memories. Whatever you notice is part of the building process. So thank you, Nina and Jennifer, for sharing. This is part of the work. What do I notice? Because noticing allows and gets me into a particular place. And when we ask people about feelings, we ask them to CLCBE, calculate, locate, communicate, breathe, and exhale. Thank you, Crystal, for sharing. You grew up with colorism in community, right? Did anybody notice any body reactions while you were thinking about this? Oops, sorry. All right, so we're stop breathing. Thank you for sharing, Tara. Heart started beating faster. Thank you, Nina. So what we're trying to do with everybody, clench my teeth, very important, Jennifer. The more I can notice what I'm doing physically, the more I can do something about it. Imagine having reactions on your body, your thoughts and feelings, and not know it. You ever have somebody have to tell you how you feel? While you're walking, you think you're going in one direction, but you're giving off other vibes. Holding your breath, very important. All right. Now let me give you a second question real quick. If you had a do-over, you could go back in time and you could have anything happen that you wanted. You could grow a new superpower. You could come up with a new Marvel costume, and you could say, if I had a do-over, what would I do differently in the scenario I was thinking about? You don't have to come up with something new, but you can't say, I was only 5 and my little hands were too small. If you wanted to fly, you could fly. Sky's the limit. I'll give you 30 seconds. Would you do differently? What would you do differently in your first story? And put it in the chat if you can. If you were to do over, what would you want done? No limits. Thank you, Nina. I would care less about what I think everyone thought. Thank you, Leslie. Want to read people's thoughts, know what they really thought? So you would like the gift of mind reading. I would have said something. Yes, thank you, Terry. Become a journalist instead of a graphic designer. Thank you, Lionel. So you can tell on everybody. Is that the whole idea? All right, you get the idea. Nobody came up with a costume though, Marvel costume. Yeah, we'll work on that. So now why do I go through this process? And we do this, and obviously we take a lot longer to do it than just a few minutes. But when we do this online or face-to-face and with young children or adults, when we first ask people, how did you feel after the first story? They usually come up with feelings that are around sadness, embarrassment, shame, anger, guilt, embarrassment, and anxiety, disappointment. But when we actually, go over a story, and we give a lot more time than we give you, people still have sadness, but they also have other feelings. It changes the nature of talking about race, and we can do this in less than 10 minutes. We've developed interventions for young people, brief interventions, racial literacy interventions for young people in schools around the country that are 30 minutes long to help them see the potential that literally in a small period of time, what you think is impossible to talk about race or difference, But given the opportunity to tell a story differently, where you have some agency, it might change your belief that talking about race is impossible. Now, I think it's hard, but it's possible, not impossible. So what are we saying? Take home points: racial stress disrupts our bodies, feelings, thoughts, and affects health outcomes. Feeling threatened to talk about these issues, fight, flight, or fright, are human responses. It's not anything wrong with having fight, flight, and fright reactions. But not addressing those things, racial threat, eventually, not unaddressed, will impair our decision-making. And that will affect the quality of our relationships. Color blindness is around evading power and not addressing issues, avoidance, and leads to, I would say, an unethical incompetence. Racial stress, the beauty about it is that it's observable, and things I can see and manage are resolvable, but only if we face it. And I think it comes through your narrative, your story, not a story someone has made up about you. Courage is can I ask for help when I'm going through this? And we learn that young people, when they get a chance to talk about this, they're less frightened of saying the wrong thing. They're less frightened that people will think of them a certain way, because what? They have skills, they've got agency. Racial literacy is not about blame, but it is about accountability and preparation. So the question we ask people, are you prepared? Martin Luther King, in a letter from a Birmingham jail, actually, in the moment while he's writing, he stops being a preacher. He stops being a civil rights leader, a prophet, and he becomes a parent. In the middle, he says, you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she can't go to the public amusement park that has just been advertised on television. He's having a racial stress response in the middle of writing this letter from a Birmingham jail. And see tears welling up in her eyes when she's told that Funtown is closed to colored children, see ominous clouds of inferiority beginning to form in her little mental sky. Beautiful imagery, because that's what we're all trying to do. All of our children, keeping them from these ominous clouds of inferiority. Now, as I wrap up, and we have maybe a little time for Q&A, is going back to that story over a decade ago. I was giving this talk, the same talk I just gave today, to a group of lower school teachers, and a white woman, the librarian, was crying profusely, walks up to me crying, and I started crying too. And it really wasn't a real cry I was crying, but whenever somebody is crying that much, I'm an empath, so I start having tear ducts. I don't know if that happens to you, they start kicking in. And I actually didn't know if she was angry at something I said. And before I could ponder it, she said, Dr. Stevenson, I want you to know that I know about that Acme supermarket in Georgetown, Delaware. And I said, get out of here. I go all over the country. I talk about this, and I never do I run into anybody who knows that Delaware is even a state, let alone Georgetown, Delaware. She said, I know about that supermarket, Miss Dr. Stevenson, because my father was a butcher in that store. And when she said that, I started, get out of here. She also said, Dr. Stevenson, you were right about the people in that store. Their attitudes, many of them were very harsh and negative against Black and brown people, and because my father had those attitudes. And when she said that, I started crying for real. Because she basically supported, validated my story in one fell swoop. I didn't have to bring research. I didn't have to bring PowerPoint slides. She validated my narrative and how important that was in that moment, because I can go to my brother and sister and get validation, but I was overwhelmed by her understanding of that. She went on to say, I want you to know there's more to my father. My father only had a 6th grade education, and he was pummeled his whole life for and being called dumb. And I know he took out his anger on other people, but I want you to know that my dad was a good dad. And she began to tell me more about her father. And I was impressed, not only about her persistence to tell the truth that matched my narrative, but also her standing up for her father. And she was basically saying, there's more to my dad than just this one thing. She ended by saying, what I really am crying about is because I married to a Black man, and we have a 4-year-old daughter, and she's biracial, and I'm worried about raising her in this world, this crazy world. In that conversation, it made me thinking back to that article I came across, Another Country. and realized that there were images of other people whose narratives were also distorted, not just mine. This father and son doing homework in the car. He's working on his GED, son doing homework. This couple, this brother and sister sibling, when their house is being destroyed, there's more to their story as well. And the irony is, when I think about that, we are not a country in which we're trying to get from poverty to riches. We're really a country, if we think about the history, that's more about whose story gets told and whose story gets distorted. It's about how much we don't know about each other's racial stories, and how I think it's okay to find our voice of resistance when someone else is narrating a wrong story about us, to say, that's not my story. And I see that in third graders as much as I see that in police officers and educators and parents. So, what's your racial story? Thank you very much. Now, I don't know if we run out of time for Q&A, but I'll leave that to Ms. Robinson.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stevenson. We do want to have a few minutes to allow others, if they have any questions that you would like to ask. We do want to open the floor. We may have a few time to read a few questions. If you have them, please drop them in the chat, or we do invite you to come off of mute and ask your question directly.
Yes, I do have a question.
Yes.
So what does cause pre-K students to be expelled for their racial situation?
So the research on this, and Walter is the best in the country. He actually has been leading the country to get rid of expulsion out of preschool. The irony is that, and he's been successful in certain states. And this is a study not of suspension, it was a study of expulsion. Part of it is that he describes this as teachers as an adult problem. We don't have data to support that children disproportionately behave wrong or misbehave based on race. It's about their overreacting. And I think of it as not navigating the racially stressful moment, being at an 8, 9, and 10. The other thing about his research is, he says, if you have a behavioral consultant in the room, the disparity goes away. And so what does a behavioral consultant do but bring down the stress level by giving feedback or support to a teacher that's overwhelmed, right? And so he has the best research in the country. And funny thing is, we've known this since 2005. So it's this overreacting to the moment.
From the kids' perspective, not the teachers.
From the teacher's perspective, no. It's
from the teacher's.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
I understand.
And the example would be, and one other explanation psychologically is, when we are 8, 9, and 10, we're bad decision makers. You ever get so stressed, you don't even know what you're feeling. We see this in police officers as well. You're not a good judge. You're not really good decider. It doesn't matter whether you're a police officer or a parent or a student or a teacher. And it's in those moments when I'm most likely threatened and I'm making really bad judgments. So being stressed or threatened is part of the dynamic.
It's funny you say that, because in 9th grade, I put 9th grade in the chat, but in 9th grade, this was my first foray into a mixed cultured school. My grade school was all Black kids. So when I went to high school, it was predominantly Irish and Italian. My first class, first grade, 9th grade, my first year there, reached down to get some books out of my book bag, and the Italian kid that sat behind me spit on my desk. I didn't realize it until I got up and I went to put my books on my desk, and there was a wad of spit on the desk. So I raised my hand, and the teacher came over, and to your point, he didn't overreact. The teacher didn't go crazy. The teacher knowingly knew the kid behind me, because we sat near the window. Last name is Archer. The other guy's last name is A. So he called him outside. He brought him back in. He gave him a roll of paper towels, and he pointed to my desk, and the kid just wiped my desk off. And it was no big foray. It was no big. It didn't get overreacted. Nothing happened. And by 12th grade, this kid was my best friend.
Yeah. So when we talk to young people, and thank you for that story, they will tell us incidents where some teachers will address that immediately, and it doesn't become traumatic. It doesn't change the nature in the same way that you described. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Archer, for your question. Dr. Stevenson, we truly thank you for making yourself available to us tonight. It was your TED Talk that our group viewed last year that we thought was a great presentation and gave some good key takeaways. And so we're glad that you were able to join us tonight. Thank you so much, because we certainly can't pay you for your speaking and your presentation this evening to what it would be, the value of it. So we appreciate you. And so we are now going to turn over to President Davis to give us our school update.
Thank you again, Dr. Stevenson. All right, Leslie, would you like me to just kick off at this point? Wonderful.
Yes.
Hello. Yeah, thank you, parents. I know a little later than what we normally do for a home and school meeting. So we're just going to touch on some of the most important things, questions that may be on your mind. On this slide, you just see some calendar updates. I'm thinking the next month in advance. We have not officially publicized this yet amongst our student population, but we are beginning our student well-being survey. It's a quarterly survey from the school district where students answer some really important questions about how they're feeling, connections that they have made, or things that they're struggling with amongst the school. So if your children come home and say they took a quick survey in advisory, that would be the student well-being survey. I can look forward to sharing the results with all of you. Probably by the time we have our April meeting, the results will be public. This week, many students at Central High School have been involved in performing in our multicultural showcases. And tomorrow, Thursday morning, is our final showcase for 282, our senior class. There is an incredible showcase that will be happening after school on Friday for students, family members, alumni, whomever would like to come and support. This is one of the most exciting times of the year at Central High School, and we, if you're interested in joining, we look forward to welcoming you. In a few weeks on a Friday, we have an upcoming SEL Day, that stands for Social Emotional Learning Day. Our SEL days are usually right before when the marking period is ending. Last but not least, at the end of March, before we say goodbye for spring break, there are report card conferences happening. We have not yet publicized the sign up for this, but that is something to be on the radar in the next couple weeks to come. And of course, school will be closed for a week, the first week of April, for our school district's spring break. Next slide, please. Great. Couple more updates, and some of this builds on questions that I had in our last month's home and school meeting. So you see those first 3 bullet points are our 3 big dances coming up before the school year is over. Sophomores is on the eve of spring break, 31st, followed by a junior prom. The location is to be announced, as well as our senior prom location to be announced. Our graduation for our 282nd class is occurring on Monday, June the 12th. There's a flyer, the PDF right there. It's also on our website. Happening at 10 o'clock. We are extremely excited to return to the Kimmel Center, the Verizon Hall. Beautiful, beautiful venue. More information will be posted on our school's website about our graduation. I see a question in the chat from Bridget about teachers' conferences. There will be both in-person as well as virtual options to attend. These are some quick updates from our counseling department. Many of our seniors, 282, have received information about what they're going to be doing next year and are celebrating college acceptances. The majority of regular decision notifications are going to be coming in the next 3 to 4 weeks, mid-March through April 1st. Our junior class, 283, our counseling team has kicked off post-secondary planning for them all. Last Friday, when we had a half day, that is some of the things that our counseling department was working on. They have shared a lot of information with your students via email and on their Google Classroom page. One thing that's really important to be is making sure that you all as parents and guardians also have information that's accessible to you, because Google Classroom is really a student-facing interface. So last year, our counseling department utilized our school's website. They have a specific tab. We're going to continue to do that moving forward. It's not up there yet. As always, reach out to your student's counselor if you have any questions. We have 6 counselors in our counseling department, and assistant principal Avi Snyder is our administrator who oversees our counseling department. Dances and proms are not mandatory. They are completely optional. That's one of the questions I see in the chat. And I believe there will be a video of this presentation, this home and school meeting, if that's what you mean, available. Leslie, correct? It's being recorded. Wonderful. And then on the last 2 slides, I just wanted to share some updates about our athletics. We wrapped up our winter sports season. There's a couple final championships going on, lots of things to celebrate. I'm not going to read every name on this slide, but the left-hand side is our boys and girls swim team. Lots of individual champions, team championships, and they are all public champions. And as they also participated, we're in District 12 PIAA. Next slide, please. Thinking about the conclusion of our other winter sports, our wrestling team had a really strong season, 5-1. They finished second in the public league, and they competed last week in the state regional championships. We had a lot of students win some individual awards, which was a lot to celebrate. Our girls and boys basketball team also did really, really well. They are still continuing in the PIAA. So down there below, I shared information about our girls varsity team and our boys varsity team. They have a game, 2 games coming up in the next week. That's a hyperlink. If anyone is ever interested in attending any of these games, you can search for them. PIAA, we are in District 12. Tickets are $8, and it's kind of fun to go out and check out our teams playing. So feel free, if you'd like to do that, to check that out. And then last but not least, our track and field, they're incredible. They go year round. In the winter, they're indoor, and we have lots of things to celebrate. They participated last week in the public league championships, and we have some students, in addition to what the team is doing and how the team is succeeding, we have lots of students individually who are really excelling, which is special. So we have kids who are traveling to Lehigh University, frequently out of state, to compete in different indoor track and field events, which is pretty cool. I think that this slide is not fully updated. We have more sports than just baseball and softball. We also have tennis, lacrosse, badminton, and I think I'm forgetting one more. Hold on. Co-ed track and field, boys and girls lacrosse, boys tennis, and girls badminton. Those have all, the practices have all kicked off, and our games are going to start beginning next week. One more. Yep, I think that's it on my end.
Thank you so much, Kate, President Davis. And I'm just add my voice to the thank yous for Dr. Stevenson's wonderful presentation. We're going to go through the rest of our committee updates quickly, starting with Treasurer's Report from Nina.
Good evening, all. Just really quickly, as you can see, it was a very quiet month in February for income. I imagine that's going to change, as Robin will talk to you about the spring auction that's coming up. So get involved with that. And then otherwise, we've been, working hard to fulfill the departmental grants with the resources that we have, and, and just caring about our normal course of business in support of the school.
Thank you. Fundraising from Robin.
Yeah, hi, good evening, everybody. So there is still spiritware, so order that. We do have, it's online, and I believe there's links on our website to order more spiritware. We will be having the Caring for Central silent auction. Actually, it's Celebrating Central, not Caring for Central. Celebrating Central auction May 6th at the Fleischer Art Memorial. It will be probably like 5:30 till 10, and it'll be an online auction, as well as we will also have items at the auction as well. And we're gonna have food and drinks and dessert at the event. It's a really fun event, and it's 719 Catherine Street. So it's down that area of the city, and they do have free parking. So we do have a parking lot that is available to us. So that's great. So it's easy to get to. So it'll be a really great event. If you want to sponsor the event, we're always looking for sponsors. If you have suggestions of businesses to sponsor, we can certainly reach out to them if you have ideas. I'll be sending out some links online as far as donating items, and then also to purchase tickets as well. And if you do want to just join the committee and put in a little bit more time than that too, my email is there. We always like to have people to help donate their time to help out. But again, there are some people here that were there last year. It is a really fun time. If Mr. Horowitz does the live auction, it will be even more fun. And then we are a 501c3 organization, so anything that you donate is tax deductible. That's all I have.
Thank you, Robin.
Thank
Great.
you.
Next up is Campus Beautification, which has been working very hard to plan our next events. I think we have Terry with us. Terry, are you still here? I'm not sure. I'll just read this quickly. We have the next event is the Central Spring Cleanup on Saturday, April 1st, and that will coincide with the city's cleanup day. This is a great opportunity, as she has here, for community service hours to be earned. We encourage students and parents and the rest of the community to come out, and there will be more there. I know that they're working on a few more opportunities, and they will advertise those as they come up. Anti-Racism Network.
Hello, everyone. We just would like to make an announcement that this Sunday on March 12th at 4 p.m. is our next meeting. We are starting to gear up a little bit more for our fundraising efforts, which we'll be doing our annual now popcorn fundraiser with Double Good, which means that all the participants will have their popcorn delivered directly to them. So look out so that you may order from us. And we will be opening the scholarship applications to our students March 20th through April 21st. I know some students have already asked me when the applications will be open. So if you know students, please make them aware of the dates and also encourage them to apply for the scholarship. It is to encourage the students that have been committed to moving in anti-racism and establishing a better Central community. And it doesn't just have to be things that they've done for Central. It could be anywhere, any way that they are making movement. We do know that we are in the midst of having Multicultural Week. AAPI will be doing their showcase next month. So please speak to your students, and staff are also able to nominate their nominees for those that they believe, should be considered for a scholarship. Thank you, Leslie.
Sorry. Thank you, Rita. The Safety First Coalition has their next meeting coming up Monday, March 20th, and that's from 6:30 to 7 p.m. There'll be an announcement in the parent listserv, so everyone can look out for that. I want to thank all of our committee volunteers who are listed here. You've heard from some of them reporting this evening. Anyone who's interested in volunteering can reach out through the Facebook page or parent group, Google group to inquire about opportunities. Also, thank you to the class representatives, and we're going to hear from them now. I don't know if we have Lisa with us for 282. Dues can be paid online. And Battle of the Classes charity is coming up, and I think that for 282, the charity is CHOP. And further down, I think we have an explanation of Battle of the Classes. Do we have Jamie or Shanice this evening?
I'm here. So hoodies are on sale. Students can purchase from Mr. Horowitz in his classroom, room 207. There's a basketball tournament happening next week. I don't know a lot about that beyond what's here, but if people are interested, they should definitely reach out to Mr. Horowitz. We're also doing the 4th Street Cookie Dough Tub fundraiser. And the fundraiser is an opportunity for students to sell cookie dough from 4th Street, famous 4th Street, to raise money to cover their dues. So this is a really good opportunity for people, who are maybe finding the dues a little steep. This is a way that you can offset some of your own amount that you have to pay. Battle of the Classes, the charity is the Alzheimer's Association for 283. There's a run, walk, jog for parents, which you do it on your own, I guess, between April 1st and 13th. Junior prom is April 28th. We're all still waiting with bated breath to find out where that's going to be. And of course, always Central at the Phillies, buy your tickets. Thanks.
Thank you, Jamie. Here's a slide on Battle of the Classes, school-wide competition in determining class superiority. Activities include a bunch of fun athletics, strategic and academic activities, March 14 to April 14. And it will culminate with the 5K. And then you can see each class supports their own charity, and you can see the charities listed there for each of the classes. I know we have Amy with us tonight for 284.
Hi. So the most important thing for 284 is the soft hop, which will be the very last day of the month, right before spring break at Lucky Strike. The tickets are on sale now, and you can buy them in room 313, either during open advisory or during lunch. Battle of the Classrooms was just covered. We are Big Brother, Big Sisters. That's the charity for 284. And if you go to your Google Classroom on 284 or Seminar Sophomore, on one of those 2 pages on Google Classroom, they have information for a digital media production workshop that kids can join. There's at least 2 community service opportunities, because I know we're trying to get our hours in. One is this Saturday. It includes cleaning up a garden, I think off of Ridge Avenue somewhere. And another one is tutoring students in a middle school. And there's also mental health support in there. And there's different opportunities for math, science, and STEM programs. Thank you.
Thank you. And Debbie?
Thank you. So I'll be fast. We all know it's Multicultural Week. We all know what charity 285 has, Gift of Life. We just were promoting the Central at the Phillies. There is the QR code here if anyone wants to take a picture of it. It should work. Then there's a handoff ceremony to the class sponsor for next year that they're working on, and a freshman field day that will be June 12th or 13th. And of course, we want everyone to participate. Encouraging low, not sure what that means. Encouraging everyone to participate in the 5K. So that should be fun. And there's the live for the kids and the virtual for the adults, which people spoke about. And that's it.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Here's a schedule of our upcoming HSA meetings, only 2 more. Hard to believe how quickly this year is going by. And a lot of these dates listed are dates you've already seen from President Davis's update. So Multicultural Week, the cafe is on Friday morning. The showcase is on Friday evening at 5 p.m. And I think all the rest of these we've heard about already. So I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. It was a wonderful presentation. I'm sorry. We have one more slide. This is from our Alumni Association. And I think one of the class updates actually mentioned the Digital Media Lab. They received a large donation from one of the classes 224, I believe. Class 224 supported the Digital Media Arts Lab. And let's see, Leading the Way capital campaign is coming up. Save the date for June 6th, which is their Board of Managers meeting. And they're currently actively fundraising to support a trip in April to the National Museum of African American History and Culture in DC. So you'll hear more about that in the next meeting and through the parent listserv. That is our last slide. Thanks to everyone for joining us tonight. Are there any questions before we sign off? Thank you all. Thank you, everyone, and have a great night. We'll see you next month.